And go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Okay. I can see that the number of participants is ticking up. Maybe we'll just hang on for 1 minute and let some more people join. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Palmer Buchholz. I'm a staff attorney at the Public Interest Law Project, and thank you all for joining us today on a presentation on homeless assistance and housing support programs, which are available through the CalWORKs larger umbrella program. We're going to be talking through these two programs today with assistance from Lena Silver and Elsie Howell, who will introduce themselves in just a second. And this is an opportunity. Our hope today is to give an overview of these programs, as well as lots of helpful tips for advocates to be able to help their clients get through benefits that maybe be available to them. If anybody has any questions along the way, please feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we can try to get to your questions as quick as possible. Uh, Lena, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lena Silver. I'm the Director of Policy and Administrative Advocacy at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. Super happy to be here today.
And Elsie?
Hi, good morning. Elsie Howell, she, her pronouns, please. I'm a staff attorney with Bay Area Legal Aid, and I specialize in CalFresh, CalWORKs, and general assistance issues in the San Francisco Bay Area. Thanks so much.
And Lauren?
Hi everyone, Lauren Hanson, she, her pronouns from the Public Interest Law Project. I'm a staff attorney here and I work on homelessness and public benefits.
Thank you so much. So let's dive right in. Like I mentioned, we're going to be giving a general overview of the homeless assistance and housing support programs, talking through eligibility to receive benefits, what's available through these programs, how to access them, and any pitfalls you might encounter along the way. We're going to be focusing or presenting information about some counties that I think represent on the ground experiences that are quite different from one another. We're going to be hearing about Bay Area counties as well as Los Angeles County and how these programs operate there specifically as a illustrative point about how different these programs can be county to county. And at the end, I'm going to plug a toolkit, an advocate's guide that PILP has drafted on these programs that will be available to everybody to further help advocates understand how these programs work and access them, and again, support their clients in accessing these essential benefits. So let's dive right in. These programs, as an overall note, are subject to fair housing requirements as well as Housing First. Housing First stands for the principle that programs should facilitate access to housing without getting held up by sort of secondary barriers to people being able to access housing. So for example, it would be inappropriate to make access to housing support contingent on, let's say, addiction recovery or, clearing up some sort of record issue that might otherwise obstruct somebody's access to housing. The theory here is that by accessing housing first, people are able to stabilize and then address whatever else they need to in life, rather than the inverse process. Really quickly, that's good on Housing First. This rule does tend to apply more to the housing support program than the homeless assistance program. We're going to hear in just a minute about the homeless assistance program, which comes down to essentially providing financial support to people who are in need as soon as possible. And because the program is structured in that way, we tend not to see Housing First issues in providing that benefit. So it does tend to apply more to the housing support program in experience, but legally, obviously, they would both be subject to it. Lena, can you talk us through the homeless assistance program?
I'd be happy to. Okay, so homeless assistance through CalWORKs is in the part of the Welfare and Institutions Code, along with other non-recurring special needs payments available to people who are on CalWORKs or applying for CalWORKs, in the process of applying for CalWORKs. And we don't have a slide here, but just to make sure everyone knows, CalWORKs is the California version of temporary assistance for needy families. It is, or welfare, used to be called AFDC. This is your cash aid benefit for people with children. There are other trainings about who's eligible for CalWORKs and how to navigate that. I direct you to a recent training we did with PLI, but we're not going deep into CalWORKs here. We're focusing on this kind of, it's not an ancillary because I don't want to use that term, but it's one of the benefits that come with CalWORKs eligibility. The statistic is that it supported nearly 50,000 California families in 2022. You'll learn in a second, there's two different forms of it, the temporary and the permanent. I'm going to assume that the majority of those folks who got the benefits got temporary homeless assistance. I'm also going to assume that they probably didn't get all that they were eligible for, but you can see that the need is tremendous. So we're also thinking about in this training, how to make sure people maximize their use of all of the different types of homeless assistance and expansions of homeless assistance. So a CalWORKs family can receive a maximum amount of temporary HA, which we'll learn in a second what that is, and one permanent payment in any 12-month period. But there are exceptions that we'll go through, which is homelessness as a direct result of domestic violence by a spouse, partner, or roommate, physical or mental illness, uninhabitability of the home, and a state or federally declared disaster. And I'll go into those each with a little more detail in a sec. The timing is really important. This is something advocates are kind of fighting over and that we don't think really happens appropriately most of the time, and definitely something to be aware of. For temporary homeless assistance, the law was updated in the last few years that you should get this in the same day that you apply. That even means if you go late in the day, you should be walking out with money. The idea is, of course, this is to get shelter that night, and we don't want people waiting another day. And then with permanent homeless assistance, that's available within 1 working day. But it's definitely an advocacy point to be fighting to maintain those timelines. The money is placed directly on an EBT card with hotels usually, and sometimes the money goes on the EBT card or directly to the landlord when it's to pay arrearages or move-in assistance. This CDSS Homeless Assistance webpage is a hyperlink. You'll be getting these slides. This has the link to the Welfare Institution Code, which is really honestly the most up-to-date version of what the law is, because the law has changed recently. It's changed twice in the last few years, SB 1065 and SB 1083. Some pieces are still being implemented. So to stay up to date, I would definitely visit this webpage. On the right side, you see the all county letters, which is how CDSS is interpreting the law and implementing it, and what counties should be taking and implementing into their policy. But I did a little quick review of a few counties last night. There have been some delays and some really big wins and changes thanks to folks from Western Center and CCWRO fighting to make homeless assistance more accessible. You may need to reference this page if you're an attorney, and if you need support, we definitely want you, if you're in homeless services or whatever, you should be reaching out to your local legal aid if you're having difficulty understanding it. Okay, so next slide I think would be easiest for me, Balmer. Is that okay? Or should I do it? Okay, awesome. So who's eligible for homeless assistance? Both CalWORKs recipients and applicants who are apparently eligible. So apparently eligible means you fill out the application and there's nothing on it on the face of the application that you swear to that makes it look like you're not eligible. You don't have too much money. You don't have too much money in the bank. The only verifications that you need to provide to be apparently eligible is your ID, proof of immigration status, which if you don't have on hand, probably can be verified through the SAVE system, and verification of pregnancy. But this also has been improved thanks to advocacy in the last few years, where all you have to do is provide a sworn statement that you're pregnant. So a woman who has no other children but is pregnant is eligible for this benefit. You get to do that for 30 days before you get your doctor to write you a note, but even then it can be extended for good cause. Something to be aware of is a lot of times we see families where mom or dad is undocumented, but their children are eligible for CalWORKs. They are eligible for homeless assistance, but there are some kind of proration formulas where basically the parent is not going to be aided in the determination of the temporary homeless assistance, and they're not going to be aided in the move-in and arrearages assistance. But that's kind of a tricky thing. Again, I think if you're confused by that, to check in with legal aid if you're not legal aid, and check in with support centers if you are. Okay, the other requirement is that you're homeless or at risk of homelessness, but this is a broader definition than if, for example, you're a you're a housing advocate and the HUD definition. It's broader. You're lacking a fixed or regular nighttime residence, residing in a shelter or place not ordinarily used for sleeping. But honestly, it's really quite broad. You might be kind of couch surfing, but if you don't get some money soon, you're going to get kicked out. It's really quite broad. And the other thing that has happened recently is you can attest to your homelessness. You do not have to provide proof. You don't have to show the papers that you recently got evicted or someone at a shelter saying you've been staying there. You just need to attest to homelessness. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Those are people who are eligible for homeless assistance. So we'll go to the next slide. And I assume there are no questions yet. I don't think so. Okay. Okay, so first we're going to focus on temporary homeless assistance. And one other little thing I didn't say. So this is state-funded homeless assistance. There's so many different forms of homeless assistance that kind of come to CalWORKs families, and especially in LA, it can be confusing. This is like in the Welfare Institutions Code. You're entitled to this like you're entitled to CalWORKs. If you're eligible for it and you meet the requirements, you get it. So I just want to make sure people understand that. But basically, there's a minimum of $85 a day for people who are experiencing homelessness presently, who need emergency temporary shelter. Then the money increases, I think, by $15 per household member and can go up to $145 based on the family size. It's not very much money. We know that. Part of kind of the work of advocates is to try to get this amount increased. It can be pretty tough in certain markets to be housed with that amount of money. So I'm just putting that out there. But there's also been expansions of how you can use this money, and we're definitely seeing our clients use them. So it doesn't just have to be like a formal business, like a hotel, motel, or shelter that costs something. You can also stay in a friend's place or a family's house, or we recently had a client stay in an RV on the property of a family member, giving them this money, making it more palatable for that family member or friend to take this family in for those few days that they use it. If no exceptions apply, which we'll cover on the next slide, temporary homeless assistance is just 16 days, once every 12 months. And you don't get it all at once. You get 7 days, then you have to go back, prove that you spent it, prove that you did a housing search. You get another 7 days, you have to go back, and you get the final 2 days. I do want to note for the housing search that there's good cause exemption available. This can be any really good reason that you weren't able to go pound the pavement while you're living in a motel with children to do that housing search. So just keep that in mind if that is a barrier for any of your clients. But I really want to emphasize how difficult it is for people to go 7 days, 2 days, and to make sure that if you're helping people connect with temporary homeless assistance, they actually do access all of the days if they need them, because it can be very disruptive for them to get kicked out, move back somewhere else, etc. So that's temporary homeless assistance, but there's expanded temporary homeless assistance. And this is a little bit tricky. There's 2 different kind of ways to get expanded temporary homeless assistance. You might even, I think, be able to get both. So people are entitled to an additional 16 days in a 12-month period for the following things: past or present domestic violence, which I would encourage people to use kind of expansively. I would say we try to be creative at Neighborhood Legal Services, even if the DV happened in the past, but you can kind of link the family's ongoing housing crisis to past DV. I think there's an argument that a family should get another 16 days. So that would be 32 days. Medically verified physical or mental health issues. So yeah, the code says you do need a note from a doctor, for example. But yes, that should be another 16 days. Uninhabitability of the home. This is not just like really bad mold, unfortunately, or like habitability that ramps up. Although I think you should try it, especially if it gets so bad that, the family's getting sick or something like that. But it's like things like a sudden flood or a fire. But just keep it in mind. Yes, I think mental or physical illness for either parents or child, it has to be kind of I think, linked to the homelessness, but there's always ways to make a good argument. I would say if your family really needs to stay there and you know that there is a mental or physical health issue, and I would reach out to legal aid if you're not legal aid and fight the good fight if you are. And then a declared disaster, this also kind of expanded. It doesn't have to be a natural disaster. It also can include something like COVID. So during COVID, there was expanded HA and everyone should have been getting 32 nights, especially if there was some link to COVID and their homelessness, which for just about everyone there was. Okay, but in addition, there's expanded temporary homeless assistance for domestic violence applicants. So these are people who are actively fleeing domestic violence, although again, I think if you can make a link between their current homelessness and domestic violence in their recent or semi-recent past, and they're applying for CalWORKs, should advocate for 32 additional nights. This is once in a lifetime. It's for applicants. But the law also recently changed that you get 32 days, even if you're approved for CalWORKs within the time that you're using. This is so confusing. I was like reading lots of ACLs last night. It used to be that, let's say you apply for CalWORKs, you're apparently eligible, right? You can get homeless assistance while your application is pending, as long as you're apparently eligible, which we already went through. But let's say your application is approved at 14 days. It used to be that you couldn't get another 16, but the law also recently changed. You can get all 32 days, regardless of if your CalWORKs application is approved within that first 16 days. So it's my understanding you can get this 32, then you could probably get another 12 and another 16 for regular HA, temporary homeless assistance, and another 16 for expanded. I haven't tried this yet, but I think that that's how it goes. I can kind of be in conversation with Palmer to see if we can, make sure it kind of gets into the guide, or we can send a follow-up. But according to the law, and anybody's free to check the WIC, which again is linked at the CDSS homepage, that's my understanding. And again, you don't have to prove domestic violence by showing there's a restraining order or pictures or anything like that. It's a sworn statement of domestic violence, just like it's a sworn statement of homelessness. So these laws have changed recently. Again, if you're from counties, that have a hard time updating these things, make sure you might need to do some advocacy really after this training to go check out the most recent ACLs, check out the recent changes from SB 1063 and 1083. 1065 and 1083, and make sure your county is up to date with all these changes. Okay, so now we're moving on to permanent homeless assistance. Okay, so permanent homeless assistance in our county in LA, it kind of gets broken out into two different titles, but they're technically just under the same name in the law of permanent homeless assistance. So one is arrearages, to pay arrearages, and that's to prevent eviction. And basically the law is you can get up to 2 months of rental debt. The tricky thing is that your rent can't exceed 80% of your household's total monthly income. So this is where I think creativity really comes into play, where you might want to think about finding other sources of financial assistance to bring the family's rent burden down so that their income is 80%. And I mean, what we often see, and there's a story that I put at the end, is like a family is experiencing domestic violence, abuser leaves, there's a drop in income, and they're trying to stabilize their home, and they experience a few months of rental debt. So you want to think about a roommate, or you might want to think about other types of rental assistance, from temporary rental assistance from family, which this is another tricky CalWORKs tip. There's something called a partial payment for an item of need. If somebody pays some of your rent and you pay even $1, it doesn't count as in-kind support. That will reduce your CalWORKs amount by $500, $600, depending on your family size. So, you can get creative there, but basically it's 2 months of rental debt. We do see that if you have more than 2 months and the 2 months will not cure the eviction, the county may not give you the money. This is again, where you kind of try to get creative. What are other sources of homeless assistance, which you will be learning about from HSP, and I'll tell you about a few other sources from LA County, where if you can cobble together, you know, enough so that all that's left is 2 months, then you can get that money from the county. So really be thinking about how to braid and combine different sources of financial assistance so you can exhaust all of this money. The other type of permanent homeless assistance is money to move in. So families already experiencing homeless assistance. In an ideal world, let's say someone gets temporary homeless assistance and it works. They should be transitioning to moving in. I know that that is not really realistic. I've heard in LA County, it's 8 to 9 months that it takes a family who experiences homelessness and gets some kind of rapid rehousing support to transition. But let's just say this money is available. It does not cover the first month's rent because the idea is that the family has some sustainable source of income that they can pay rent with going forward, but they don't have the security deposit in last month. You can also pay utility fees, but that would only kind of work out if you didn't have to pay a security deposit or last month, I think, because well, I don't know. SB 1065 kind of changed it where it's not capped at 2 months of rent. So let's say there's a security deposit that's worth 2 months of rent, you would still be able to get it and the last month, but I think that hasn't quite been implemented yet. So this is where we're figuring out exactly where we are, but the most basic is a security deposit and last month, but the same rule about 80% of the household income. The other thing that is changing, but we don't have an exact implementation date yet, is it used to be that to get move-in costs, you had to show that you were being imminently evicted through a notice to pay rent or quit or a notice to quit. Now the law will be, and we'll, again, hopefully if you RSVP'd here, we'll keep you up to date. That if you get a notice like a rent increase that you can't pay and you know you have to leave, you can utilize move-in costs. You have to provide proof of payment. You will get an overpayment, and you can get accused of fraud. I mean, that's something that happens quite commonly in the welfare system, unfortunately, if you don't show you use the money for the thing that it was designated for. So definitely advise your clients to keep proof of payment, to submit it to the county, and be careful about that. This also is once every 12 months, but the same exceptions as the additional 16 days of temporary homeless assistance apply. Okay, I see. Could you elaborate on eligibility based on physical or mental disability? Would it include, for example, someone who gets evicted because of something related to their disability? I would say yes. Again, the law is pretty open, but I think these are all things to kind of test. I can't say that I have like a recent example per se, but our county in LA is pretty flexible. If there's proof of, honestly, I also think it's just someone who's experiencing those symptoms presently would be able to get expanded HA. If client is pregnant and homeless, can she qualify for services even if her baby isn't expected till December? Yes, we did cover this. So anybody who is pregnant at any stage of their pregnancy who provides a sworn statement of pregnancy, even if she has no other children, is eligible for homeless assistance immediately upon application if apparently eligible. That is also a change that's achieved by wonderful advocates. It used to be based on your age, either the first or second trimester. Now it's immediate. As soon as you're pregnant and you have 30 days with a sworn statement, which can be increased with good cause. And then within 30 days or more with good cause, you have to provide medical verification from a doctor. Not if you're undocumented. That's a really good question. We did ask this recently. It is very weird, but not if you're undocumented. So you do have to wait for the baby to be born. And if that baby has legal status, then the family would be eligible for homeless assistance for the baby. They'd get the $85 for the night. Okay, these are really good questions. Okay. What if there are problems? I'm happy to take this, but yeah, due process applies. These are obviously like of imminent need, and there are processes for expedited hearings. This would be a situation where you would seek an expedited hearing if denied. And that process is again in the WIC, that it's accessible, but you may need to be a little bit savvy to access the presiding judge and this appeals and state hearings to ask for this, but you should also be able to call the hotline and call the state hearing division hotline and ask for an expedited hearing. But I would definitely say if you're not a legal aid attorney and you're in the community, I would go to a legal aid attorney specializing in public benefits and seek assistance with expedited hearing. In LA County, when we have issues, we have an informal process of escalating issues to DPSS supervisors and directors. And so that's what we use when there's an immediate need with one of these cases. So that's also something good to develop in your county if you haven't. You're entitled to receive a notice and an opportunity to contest any action like we're talking about. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. That was wonderful. Kicking it over to Elsie Howell. Can you introduce us to the Housing Support Program?
Yes, happy to. Also, I'm a little sniffly this morning, so apologize if that comes through on the recording. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the Housing Support Program. So this program provides, it's kind of broad. It provides funding to support housing stability. There's a lot of difference on the ground, and that's part of why this program is often so broad. Counties, it's kind of like general assistance in as much as there are some rules and the funding comes from higher up, but counties administer their own version of the housing support program. And very frequently, they contract with local service providers to actually provide the relevant services. So there are a lot of things you can get through HSP. It just depends a little bit on where you are. You can get financial assistance, including security deposits and moving costs, housing navigation, case management, interim housing assistance, legal services and credit repair. There are some core components that should be offered everywhere. Financial assistance and housing navigation and case management. Those should be pretty consistent. Everything else, you might have to do a little bit of investigating to see what exactly your county can offer. Okay, so who's eligible? The eligibility definition is pretty broad. It's people who are either experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And so, kind of like for HA, this is not, some of the stricter definitions out there. So even if you haven't received termination notice or, a notice to pay or quit, anything like that, you can still qualify. If you don't have any, if you do know that you are going to be coming up on, an eviction or something like that that might leave you without a place to stay. If you don't have anything secured for the future, that could also provide a basis for eligibility. And just a sort of a broader catch-all bucket is if you lack the resources to stabilize and secure your housing. So, these are some pretty broad ways to qualify, and it is a very big but. There is discretionary prioritization for this program. So, unlike HA, this is a program where, you might qualify, you might meet the eligibility criteria, but you may not be able to actually get assistance through the program. Counties have a lot of discretion in how they specifically choose to do their prioritization. If I remember correctly, I think there's an ACL out there that recommends that 30% roughly should go to folks who are at risk, and the rest should go to folks who are actively experiencing homelessness. And so what this means is just that, it's important to the extent that that information is available to check on, what their prioritization is, but also just to help sort of set expectations for folks who are applying. There is no one specific application, or at least there's not one that's statewide. Counties sometimes have their own applications. I know that that's true in a number of Bay Area counties. They have their own forms that they do apply consistently within the county. It's just that they won't be relevant outside of them. It's important to try to have a county point of contact for HSP, and partially this is because it's good to have somebody you can talk to if somebody has a problem or if you want to know what services are provided. But it can also provide really helpful context. not just the services provided, but also the number of people who are aided in a given year can vary a lot from county to county. I know we've got one county that helps about 100 people a year, and another county that helps about 500 people a year. So there can be a pretty big range there, and it can be good to know sort of what the lay of the land is where you are is.
Yeah, I might just want to add, if that's okay.
Mhm.
I would say figure out how your county is doing HSP. Most in LA, for example, we don't even call it HSP. The money goes from DPSS to LAAC, which is our homeless authority, and then gets sub-granted to lead agencies in each service provider area, and is just part of the general funding source for the family homeless system. People do have to be eligible for CalWORKs to get it. We've had, for example, people come to us saying, I'm being told that I can't go into a shelter tonight until I get CalWORKs, but I'm afraid because I'm undocumented, and we have to give counseling about public charge and that a child's use of benefits does not impact a parent, so that family can access like our general homelessness system in LA. So do kind of follow the money, try to figure out how to access this money in your respective county. In LA, because of this separation between HA, which we all just covered, and kind of the longer term, deeper housing supports, we're trying to do a lot of advocacy to kind of connect the pieces. What should be happening is when someone comes into LA County DPSS asking for CalWORKs, asking for emergency homeless assistance, they should be getting a warm referral to our family solution centers, which is how you get into the homeless system, which is how you get HSP, but that often doesn't happen. So this is right now a temporary source of funding for California. We hope that it will become more permanent, but it is a huge source of funding for homeless services. And you definitely want to find out how your CalWORKs clients can access it, because it's not necessarily being administered by your local welfare department.
And I can just add one thing. Western Center on Law and Poverty did a Public Records Act to get all of the county HSP documents and plans. And so they have graciously offered to give those to you if you are interested in your local county's plan. You can either reach out to me or any one of us on the webinar, or Jody Berger at Western Center.
Yeah, thank you both. And I think that just goes to show, how widely these programs can range. I know just in the Bay Area, by contrast, a lot of counties do have a specific HSP program, even if some of them do brand it a little bit differently. But, it is HSP dollars and follows HSP rules. But, even though it's contractors out in the community who are providing these services, in order to get them, you have to apply through the county, which, can add other obstacles there. And, sometimes the warm referral doesn't always happen. And, just to say that, yeah, all of these can vary a lot. And thank you for those examples. Sorry, I think, all right, let me.
Yeah, definitely. I think I saw Deborah, my buddy from MCHA, asked a question like, how do you expedite these referrals? Like, I mean, all I can say from the LA perspective, and I'm going to guess the experience is not so different in other counties throughout California. We are in a deep and horrible homelessness crisis, and not everyone who should be getting this assistance as fast as possible is getting it or will get it. It can be spent down in one area of the county and one service provider and not spent down in another. You could get to a DPSS, they're called homeless case managers, which is where you should end up, and get a great referral to a family solution center, and another person won't get that. I just had to write an email this week asking for a family that's been seeking homeless assistance for months. Have you ever referred them to a family solution center, which is the only way to get intaked into the system to access HSP, to access any state or federal dollars. So, these systems don't always work great. And that's, the role of advocates and direct service providers to kind of keep a pulse on that. And, you can reach out in LA to me. You can reach out to PILP if you want to talk about, I'm going to guess, like how this is working or not working, or if you can't even figure out, you've never heard of this before and you can't figure out who's administering it in your county and you want help learning how to navigate it. There's also one question still open for my section. What type of receipts documentation would folks receiving homeless assistance, permanent homeless assistance to stay with friends or family? Oh no, sorry, temporary. To stay with friends or family since they wouldn't be paying daily stay to a landlord. It's a written document. I'm letting this person stay here with their kids for $85 a night for this many nights, and she paid me this much money. That should be enough. If that isn't enough and you have access to legal aid, you should definitely reach out.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so what do you do if there are some problems with your HSP? Due process is always an important thing people should be getting. Like I touched on earlier, one of the things about HSP is that they're not going to be able to help everybody who applies, and even if you do meet the eligibility criteria, you might not get on the program. But if you are on an HSP program, then if you do get terminated for some reason, the county should send you a notice. That doesn't always happen. I've heard some stories from a couple of places that it can vary a little bit. I know in the Bay Area, what we see is at least in quite a few of the counties, people do get notices that let them know, you've been terminated from the housing support program for reason X or reason Y. And it is the eligibility criteria for HSP is pretty broad, and counties do have a lot of discretion in not just how they implement those programs, but there are still some rules that are reasonably hard and fast. So I know I have not had one of these cases myself, but I have had colleagues who have not had to go through with a hearing, but have been able to push back on terminations or things of that nature by pointing to some of these rules. You can file with CDSS, the State Hearings Division should have jurisdiction over the hearing request. And as with pretty much all these state fair hearings, you can either request it directly through CDSS, or you can go through the county to get that process started. Yeah, and okay, and now we're on to client stories.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so because these programs differ so much in counties, we wanted to spend some time kind of just talking through some examples. So I have a client story here, a CalWORKs client, basically fleeing domestic violence. This happened in a very rural county in Northern California. And basically she was able to get homeless assistance and stay at a hotel. I mean, it's only 2 weeks, but it was really like, that's what she needed to kind of stabilize somewhat. But then she was able to kind of connect with family and ended up getting an RV that she parked on her sister's property. And that kind of like just that stability then basically allowed her to get other forms of help, and that connection with the county allowed her to get other forms of help, which then she then went to college, and she's now working as a medical assistant. So it really can be the spark that gets somebody into a much better situation. I wanted to just highlight quickly, we put out a call for like, what are you seeing in your counties? And so I wanted to give you some issues of things that have popped up, some big, some small. So for example, in one county in the Central Valley, the county just messed up. This is pretty common. Like the counties make mistakes. They sent the wrong amount to the landlord, which put the person at risk for eviction. And in this circumstance, the advocate was able to just work informally with the county to correct that mistake. There are certain situations, like for example, in the HSP program, where someone needed to relocate to a larger unit, and it was denied by the CalWORKs program. So you should be thinking about reasonable accommodation requests, and creative ways to try to get the client what the client needs. And then due process, as Elsie mentioned before, is really critical. And as with not just this program, these programs, with all programs, there's always the potential for the county to send an inadequate notice of action. And so that's a point of advocacy in your county. If you see something that does not explain, explain why the county is taking, or what action the county is taking and why they're taking that action, and also the specific regulations that support the action. Lena, I think this is
Yeah, that's my example. I also put in the chat a resource from LA. LA uses some of what's called single allocation dollars for their GAIN program, their welfare to work program for CalWORKs families that are eligible for welfare to work, which excludes people who are undocumented, people on SSI, people who are timed out, although there are extensions, again, watch the PLI training, and people who are sanctioned, and there's ways to cure sanctions, again, watch the PLI training. And they supplement all of these programs even more. There's a $5,000 once in a lifetime to pay pretty much anything related to arrearages or move-in. There's 14 more days of homeless assistance. There's shallow subsidy for 4 months, called the rental assistance program. So also just be aware, if you're in LA County, take a look at that link. There's a combination of both state funded and then GAIN funded homeless assistance. So putting that there because there's just so many people in LA. Okay, here's another county example. A domestic violence survivor who's a CalWORKs recipient was facing housing instability when her abuser left. This is the one I kind of mentioned. She fell behind. I think she was only 2 months behind, so that was perfect, but she had a loss of income because the abuser left. We advised her to find a roommate who moved in quickly, started paying some of the rent. You're only responsible in the 80% calculation for the rent that you pay. So if you have a roommate, it's not the full rent, it's just your portion. That made her CalWORKs grant enough to meet the 80% threshold, and she got 2 months of homeless assistance, and the landlord accepted the money. So this is an example of using homeless assistance. Here's another person who is a DV survivor who is struggling to complete her VAWA application, to get immigration relief. She was diabetic, had just exited the hospital, had multiple kids, and they were sleeping in their car. We advised her to seek temporary homeless assistance. She walked into the county a little bit later in the day. She probably had to pick her kids up from school. They processed the application, but she left without any money on her card. We know in LA that supervisor approval, Lauren, is holding up these applications. This was an issue that was holding up expedited CalFresh too, and that is used across this county. So, again, I said we have an escalation system. We contacted the county and we made sure that the law of same-day issuance for temporary homeless assistance was followed and the money was put on her card. But this is an issue.
Thank you all so much. Those were some wonderful on-the-ground examples. Lena, I know that you've been mentioning that there's a fair amount of LA-specific variation in terms of how to access these programs and what the on-the-ground experience is like. Can you expand on that a bit? And then we'll ask Elsie to do the same for Bay Area counties.
On the ground in LA variation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there are like 25 DPSS offices. We'll also flag that at this point, the only way to apply for HA is with a paper application in person. The paper application, you can find it, is on that CDSS website that I linked. So this is a big issue. We have call centers in 33 counties or more. We have Benefits Cal, which is statewide, but you don't have these applications right now, either on the call center in LA County or statewide on Benefits Cal. Even once we have it, we know there are delays when applications go from Benefits Cal to a county. There are often delays in workers working those tasks. So there's questions about how same day is going to work. It's kind of a mess. So because you have to physically go, you are going to have different experiences with different offices that you go to. So it is really important that you're here, you're learning what the law is, you know what people's rights are, and you can fight for them, or again, reach out. Hopefully you have legal aid available in your county.
We have a question from, do the assistance limits apply statewide? Or if someone is fleeing domestic violence, can they get support from one county and then move to a neighboring county and apply again for temporary assistance if they maxed out in the first county and they still have nowhere else to relocate? So unfortunately, and Lena's shaking her head, so I know that I'm right when I say that unfortunately the answer is no. It that would be great if, if that were true, but no, the answer is no. The counties, have access to whether you've received this assistance, even if it's in another county, and they won't permit you to get additional assistance if you move counties.
Right. For HSP, there aren't these like 12-month, once in a lifetime limits, but there are like general guidance from the state that then counties adopt in different ways. This is where the variation really increases about like how long you receive that assistance, and how much money you receive, etc. So that's not quite the same. And the counties don't have databases sharing HSP spend down or anything like that. But again, yeah, the way counties are administering that is super different. And in LA, I would assume almost anyone getting HSP funded homeless services don't really know they're getting it because they're a CalWORKs recipient or what it is.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that just given what I've heard about like the relative proportion of like populations in the Bay Area that get actually helped with HSP, it's not quite winning the lottery twice, but it's one of those things where I don't think there are any hard and fast rules against getting HSP in two different counties, but I think it's practically pretty unlikely to get it twice in the same year in a different county. But yeah, just some other things. That's how HSP works a little bit up here. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, there are, I think most of the counties do have a specific, HSP program. And as far as I know, all the Bay Area counties do contract out for the actual provision of services. So what that can mean is, well, I think that one of the biggest obstacles I've been seeing, especially lately, is, folks who, well, for HA, either, are entitled to it, or for HSP, it would be helpful and, would really help stabilize their situation, and they're just sort of not aware of it or the process. And, part of this is also that, if you do learn it in, say, Alameda County, and then you go to Contra Costa County, that knowledge is just not going to transfer. But yeah, so the applications do vary quite a bit. I think at least in good handful. I think the majority of the counties, you need to start your application with somebody at the county, and that's where they sort of go through their prioritization. It seems is at that sort of initial application point, and then they will make the referral out to the service provider. This can sometimes lead to some back and forth, or it can add some time, and sometimes it adds confusion. But and so it can be tough to to try to stay on top of that. We also see that different people with different roles are responsible for sort of like kicking off referrals in the application process. I know in at least one of the counties, they recommend talking to your assigned social worker for CalWORKs to start the process. And in a different county, they ask you to start by talking to the like the welfare to work counselor. So, it's important to keep an eye on who actually is the one you need to start talking to. And practically speaking, it's also just, it can be a little tough both for recipients and for advocates, I think, just because, like the counties do have, well, I should say most counties do have some kind of rules, especially around the Bay Area, in terms of, how the program should operate, what should be done and for how long. But also, just because the people on the ground are, other community organizations, it can be important just to make sure that people are actually getting everything they need to get. Let me think. Yeah, I think those are sort of like a lot of the big regional variations we see around here, just in terms of like applications and how the program tends to be structured. What I've also seen is pretty common around here is actually decreasing rent subsidies over time, which is also something to just, to keep an eye out for or to ask about. That can change, the help people are getting and what they may or may not need. And just also something to point out is while these programs can be really different and you can get a lot of good services through them. It's also important to note that other than the sort of, the basic, really core components of like, getting direct financial support and help with housing navigation, is that everything else should be voluntary. That's one of the big selling points, I think, of the housing support program, is that it's supposed to be a more flexible, tailored approach. So, the sort of the other side of making sure people get what they need is that if they don't need something, they should be able to turn it down. And that can be, I don't think, I haven't heard of any specific issues with that in our counties, but just something to keep in mind, if somebody is feeling overwhelmed or if they're feeling like it's not a good use of their time, other than those basic core components, it should be a sort of, use it as you need it sort of approach to housing support.
Lena, there's a question in the chat I'm hoping you can help answer about how to apply. It says, I know you mentioned family solution centers and getting into the HA system through them, but it appears from the client stories that the applicants can go directly to the county office. Can you clarify?
Yeah, so just to definitely make sure you understand, the first slides that we covered, homeless assistance, temporary and permanent, those are administered in LA County directly by DPSS and can be done at like any DPSS office. To then access the additional GAIN linked homeless assistance, someone needs to go to a GAIN office or meet with them by phone and be assessed for it to get GAIN linked services, and the person has to be eligible for GAIN. There's often people who are eligible who aren't getting GAIN because, again, of sanction or being timed out, but there are ways to get people back on GAIN to get these services, which is something to look out for. For HSP, if you are a CalWORKs recipient and you do somehow get intaked by a family solution center, of which there's one per SPA service provider area. There's 8 service provider areas in LA. So big, really hard to get in and get intaked and get into what's called HMIS so that you can start receiving these services. The workarounds are you could go to DPSS and ask for a referral to a family solution center through a homeless case manager. It's a little bit unclear to me if I think there should be a homeless case manager in every office. They say that if you go in and you apply for homeless assistance, like temporary or permanent, that you're offered an appointment with a homeless case manager. I think people sometimes turn that down because it hasn't really been beneficial in the past, or they're stressed out, they're with a child, but that person could be the one that makes a family solution center referral. I think one of the issues is it's more housed within GAIN, the homeless case managers. So GAIN offices are not usually in the same location as the general eligibility office. And there's a divide, a breakdown in communication from the DPSS office to get to the homeless case manager at GAIN to get the family solution referral, which is a much more direct referral than waiting in line or calling a family solution center. So if you have a specific, Brianna, like my email's at the end, if you have a specific question about how this works, but I'm also curious and looking for more cases of kind of this breakdown of people not being able to access family solution centers. So feel free to email me.
And that's really a good illustration of how complicated, especially in LA, it can be to get this assistance. I'll just put in a plug for rural counties. In rural counties, there aren't always a lot of like community-based organizations or entities that are providing aid to folks, and so it really probably is going to be just held within the local social services office. And so that's why we've been kind of reiterating throughout the training that it really is so county specific, and it's good to get a hold of your county policies. Palmer, I'll turn it to you for the toolkit plug.
So the Public Interest Law Project has drafted an advocate's guide to these programs, which covers a lot of the information described today. Part of the goal in creating this guide, this toolkit, as we sometimes refer to it, is that, there's the Welfare and Institutions Code, which ultimately governs how these programs are supposed to operate. That statute requires CDSS to promulgate regulations, but they have not come out yet. They are in process. And rather, in the meantime, CDSS governs these programs, implements rule changes, term definitions, those types of things that are effective through guidance letters, all county letters, all county welfare directors letters. There's a host of different types of letters. As an advocate, it can be challenging to figure out how these programs work from a rules perspective, and even more complicated, as we've just been describing, to figure out how the programs are working on the ground. One of the goals of this guide is to get the rules into one place. And so we have reviewed, the CDSS website offers a host of resources available, summaries of the relevant rules, these types of things. We have provided a bunch of those within this toolkit. The Legal Services of Northern California has a regulation summary website that they maintain, and they offer to, advocates or anybody who wants to look, summaries of these types of letters and new regulations as they are promulgated, and they were kind enough to let us repost them within this guide. So those are there. We have links to helpful all county letters and different sort of guiding documents that are in effect, but might unfortunately differ from, for example, the MPP, which might not be maintained as quickly as an advocate might feel like it should be. So there's lots of helpful resources in there. One thing that to draw attention to that Lauren mentioned in the chat is that while there is no specific form for an applicant to complete to apply for HSP, we have drafted a document that might assist a client. It's a checkbox document that talks through briefly like eligibility requirements. You check a box saying my housing is unstable. You check other boxes for the types of resources that you're asking for. And the form says, if the county can't provide assistance with these needs, please provide a referral to an organization that can. Our hope is that use of that form might increase access to this program, because again, on the ground variation is so extreme that we have, heard of county workers, for example, who haven't heard of HSP as a program. Part of that might be that they're working in a county where they call it something else, like it sounds like happens in LA. Part of it is that because money comes to the county and is subcontracted out to service providers, an average eligibility worker might know that you could go to such and such a place for help with housing navigation, but they might not call it HSP. So we're trying to get around these barriers and increase access and awareness, access to and awareness of these programs. This handbook will be emailed out to participants alongside the slideshow, so there are multiple resources coming your way. The client flyers are being translated into a host of languages to be distributed to the different client communities with which you work, and it will be maintained over time as these rules adopt and change. So here's our contact information if anybody has any follow-up questions. The Public Interest Law Project is a support center. We are available to provide technical assistance and answer questions to advocates around the state. Lena and Elsie are excellent contacts within LA and the Bay Area. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate your participation.
Looks like there's an MCLE people should take a look at it too if you're a lawyer, right? Okay, so that'll be sent.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar was hosted by the Legal Aid Association of California, also known as LAAC. We are the membership organization for California's civil legal aid nonprofits. Our job is to advocate in the legislature, in the courts, and with the State Bar of California on behalf of the community of nonprofits that serve low-income Californians. In addition to our online and in-person trainings, LAAC provides coordination and advocacy for increased funding to support organizations like yours. Thank you.